Story says that Jesus went, while he's talking and he's doing what he normally does, he is tested by a lawyer, and a lawyer asked him this question about eternal life. And Jesus points back to the law and says to him, well, what does the law say? And the lawyer begins to tell Jesus what the law says. And that we should love the Lord thy God with all our heart, all our mind, all our soul, with all our strength, and love our neighbor as ourselves. And Jesus in his wisdom says, you answered correctly. Go do that thing. But it wasn't enough for the lawyer. He tries to step his game up, trying to one-up somebody. And he says, but who is my neighbor is the question he asked. And Jesus then begins to tell him a story about a man who was traveling along the road of Jericho. And while he was traveling, he was robbed, beaten, and left for dead. And Jesus says that while he was laying there, a priest came by, saw the brother, and he stepped to the other side and kept on going. While the priest kept going, a Levite came behind him, saw the same situation. The text even reads, he got close enough to see the brother, and he himself went over to the other side and kept on going. But a Samaritan, someone of a different nationality, came, saw the same scenario, and he intervened, and he got involved, and then he took the man to the inn, and he took care of him, bound his wounds, all that good stuff, and told the guy at the desk, listen, whatever you spend, let me know. I'll take care of it when I get back. Jesus then asked the question, well, who was the neighbor in this situation? He said, the man who showed the most mercy. And Jesus said to him, you go and you do likewise. That's what Jesus, the story is unfolding before us, that he shows us this man doing this great thing in this person's life, being a neighbor. Reverend, what does that have to do with good? Is it good enough? Well, track with me on this. It was a book that was written called by Jim Collins, and he made this statement that good is the enemy to great. Say it with me again. Good is the enemy to great. And another book by George C. Frazier, an African-American writer, he wrote in that book, Keith Weiss wrote in there that good isn't good enough. And he gives this definition from his perspective and says this: our excellence is tantamount, or the word is identical, to our success. Excellence, by my definition, he says, is the reinvestment of one's unique gifts or personal achievements back into the community in order to improve the human condition within the community. In corporate America, the bar is high, the race is longer, and the prize is harder to hold on to unless you learn how to play the game. In other words, personal gain is good, but it is maintained with excellence and shared with others. For example, Magic Johnson, who played basketball in the NBA for many years, gained personal achievement by winning the MVP trophy. But the excellence was achieved when Magic Johnson started the Magic Johnson Foundation, which serves minority communities. And so here it is. He helps us to see, as we put these two things together for a moment. In a second, you'll see that when it comes to doing our best, when it comes to doing good is not good enough. He requires us to push a little bit further. To whatever good I do personally, what makes it great is what I do corporately, community, what I do outside of me. There's one thing I can have personal achievement, but then there's this other issue. How can I make someone else's life better? How can I make my family's life better? How can I bring value to the table in someone else's life? And so this lawyer pushes Jesus to ask this question, who is my neighbor? He's trying to justify what he does. Here's what he tries to do. He says, basically, I've been good to my own kind, because that's what Jews said, is that as long as they've been good to their own people, they've done their neighborly duties. But Jesus is pushing him a little more, that I don't want you to just be good to your own kind. I want you to be good to everybody. Amen. I don't want you to do your best just for your family, but what can you do for someone else's family? It pushes us to get outside of ourselves, and he helps us to understand this lesson from the text. The lesson is this, that we should be a neighbor whenever and wherever we're needed, and realize that neighbors can come from surprising places.
Amen.
And we should be a neighbor whenever and wherever we're needed, and realize that a neighbor can come from surprising places. From a different community than you. It can come from a different family than you. It can come, neighbors, being a neighbor comes just by us doing good, regardless of the race or the class.
Amen.
But however, there's something else in this text that teaches us, that pushes us, that we should look at as it relates to being a good neighbor. It pushes us to go a little bit further, because he was trying to justify himself with his religious view that he's taking care of his own kind, and he should stop there. But Jesus pushes him with this story of the Good Samaritan, and then tells him what the Good Samaritan does. And he does a great job. But here's the question I'm going to leave on the table for us. How did this man's goodness to this one brother who was dying, how did that help the community? How did that help his community? The question for me was, is that enough? Is that enough for him just to have done a good act for one person? It pushes us not to just think of a narrow stream of view, but it pushes us to open our minds. How can I help as many as I can before I leave planet Earth?
Amen.
We must understand, watch this, we must understand what has been done to us, what's being done against us, what can be done for us, but realize that it can't be done without us. Let me say it again. Listen, as Christian people, in order for us to understand how we can go further in our own Christian walk, how we can be a blessing to our neighbors, whether they look like us or don't, it's for us to understand as blacks, as whites, as whomever, we must understand what has been done to us. That's my history. What is being done against us? That's what's happening right now. What can be done for us? That's possibility. But then also realize that whatever's got to be done, it cannot be done without us.
Amen.
We are needed in the equation. You are needed in the equation.
That's right.
In order to change not just one person's life, but in order to change as many people's lives as you possibly can, you are needed in the equation, not to just do something good, but to do it great.
Amen.
To do it with excellence, to do it with all of your heart, to do it with all of your energy, not to give your second best, but to give your best. Because God, listen, He has invested a lot in us.
Amen.
And those whom much has been given, much is required. Let me quickly jump to the text, give you my points, things to consider as we look at this issue of good. Isn't good enough? Good isn't good enough. He did a great thing. I'm not belittling anything what the Samaritan did, but just look with me at a different perspective when it comes to this issue in this man's life who was affected, who was laying on the side of the road, who was beaten and left for dead. Here's some things you and I can consider in our lives that we might push past being good and do better and do great and strive for more excellence. Here's a couple of things that you and I must consider in our lives. Number one is this, that you and I must be willing to correct conditions. That you and I must be willing to correct the conditions. It's in our text, verse 30 says this, that a man was going down to Jerusalem, going from Jerusalem to Jericho. Let me talk to you about the conditions that were on the road. From Jericho to Jerusalem, or to Jerusalem to Jericho, this road was a very dangerous road. The commentators say that in this particular text, this road, the journey, was one about maybe between 18 to 21 miles. And for the most part, and it was a rocky place, a desert place, a place where caves could be hewed out, a place where people, thieves, and bandits could hide at. It was a very dangerous road. And they said in their commentaries here that in that particular time, it was known as the Red or Bloody Way. That if you went down to Jericho, if you went down that road to Jericho, it's possible you could be hurt going down that road. It's possible something bad could happen to you because it was just a really rough road. The road being rocky and desolate was a notorious place for robbers and people who were hiding out to do evil in that day. That was the condition of that particular road in that time. And so anyone who traveled down there had the potential of being hurt. And church, when we look at our own lives, we must ask the question, what conditions can I change? What conditions can I change? Because the truth of the matter is God has empowered us to change conditions in our own communities, in our own house, in our own lives. He teaches us that we have the power to make a difference. Haven't you noticed that in our society right now, that people have come to the point in life where they're saying, you know what? There's some bad conditions, and I want to make some changes. Haven't you noticed the marches that have been going on? Those are people who are saying, I see the condition, and we've got to do something about the condition. I've been praying about it, but what else can we do? We've been talking about it, but what else can we do? When you look at things like the teachers who have said the conditions in our school systems are ridiculous, that the textbooks are talking about internet, www, and the internet from back in 2003. And we are now in 2018. The outdated textbooks, they're saying conditions are not correct. When you look at those who marched in Black Lives Matter, they're trying to highlight one race over the other. They're simply saying there's some conditions going on in our society where black lives are being treated differently, and we are trying to bring awareness to it because that's the condition that we see today. He's trying to help us push past our own viewpoint and said that, listen, we've got to do something about the conditions. Haven't you noticed those who are being affected by DACA, the immigration things that are happening? It's people saying we're marching because conditions are not right. And he's pressing us. God even presses us. Jesus helps us to understand that we must be willing, listen, to correct the conditions. People of color have some conditions that are against us. I'm not preaching any kind of race message. I'm just trying to tell you, in our society, people of color, people of class, people of gender have some conditions that the Lord is saying, listen, I know you're going to church, but I'm going to ask you what you're going to do about this. I know you love me with all of your heart, but someone else needs to experience freedom and liberty and a correction in the condition so that they can have the same opportunity you and I have right now today. Yeah. Reverend, come on, you're pushing us. I've got to, because it helps us to think about something. I may have mentioned this before, and I'll mention it again. In 2012, from 2012 to 2016, the voting issue in minorities was disastrous for African Americans. 2016 was a huge difference in the way they voted in 2012. In 2012, us black people turned out for the vote. Yep. But in 2016, African Americans had the lowest voting turnout than even the Hispanic turnout. In 2016, watch this, 2016, the black millennial and the vote was down. The black millennial vote was down. That means young people in their 30, maybe 35, something like that. They did not turn out to go vote in the in the most major election that there was. Reverend, what's the point you're trying to make? That, listen, we've got to be involved in the game. Conditions will not be changed just because we prayed. There must be both faith and works. There must be some engagement and understanding what conditions are that are going on all around us. Even here, listen, the black male vote was down in 2016. From 2012 when Barack was running to 2016 when you didn't have any black candidate running, the vote was down. The Latino vote was down, but it was more than the black vote in 2016. What does that mean? Listen, we can't just engage because somebody on the ticket looks like us. You got to be willing to engage whether somebody black, brown, or whatever is involved in the race. You got to go past this is a black thing and understand that what we do affects everybody. Amen. Watch, I'm telling you, listen, I'm moving. In 2008 when Barack Obama was elected, did you know all the black people who were registered to vote was not enough to get Barack Obama elected? It took the white vote in order to collectively join together with the black vote to get him elected. Watch this. And the vice versa for us in 2016. Because we had so many African Americans pull out of voting because they didn't like a candidate or wasn't interested in it, it turned around. who you didn't want, who you were surprised about, was voted into the White House. And no one can get upset about, especially from our community, except to say, ask, did you vote? I didn't vote. Well, let's not talk about this. We got nothing to talk about. Why? Because you did not engage. There is conditions that are going on around us, and he's saying to us, we got the power to correct these conditions. I said, we got the power to correct these conditions. And if you walk away saying, you say to yourself, well, it's just my one vote. I want you to know, if 3,000 of you have that same mentality, what do you think that's going to do to the vote? What do you think that's going to do to whatever you're involved in, whether we vote or whether it's in your school system, when you're voting in your school system for voting in things for our children in school? If you don't engage, change cannot happen. We cannot make corrections in the conditions in our lives. Notice that with me. So here it is. From the road from Jerusalem to Jericho is so dangerous that anybody who was going down had the potential to be robbed. And the question is, man, could somebody change the conditions on the road? Here's the second thing to consider. Not only that we should correct conditions, but here's the second thing, that we should also be willing to confront the criminals. Amen. Reverend, come on, man. Listen, I know, but just watch the text. Verse 30, he says, and while he was on the road, he fell among robbers who stripped him, beat him, and left him for dead. Did you see that? He's on the road, and these robbers came, and they stripped him, they stole his stuff, and then they didn't just steal it, they beat him. And then they left him for dead on the roadside. That's what the criminals did. But there are also more criminals, in my opinion, from this text. Because the text tells us that a Levite, a priest and a Levite saw the same guy in the condition, and they did what to him? They left him for dead. Come on, let's dig in the text and push the question and push ourselves this very morning as we look in the Word of God. So here's what we should see, that these robbers are on this road. Josephus, the historian, a Jewish historian, says that Herod was building temples, and when he no longer needed the men that was working for him, he fired them, and they did not have any work. Watch this. It was about 40,000 men whom he fired who did not have work. And Josephus, the historian, says that many of these men, of that 40,000, ended up on that road and became robbers. And people who would come down there, they would take from them in order to do whatever they wanted to do, whether it was feed their family or whatever. But they were robbing people because they were out of work. These people turned into robbers. This is what was going on in the conditions of the road. This is what was happening. These men became criminals. But not only did these men become criminals, it was a criminal activity when the priest comes down the road and he sees this brother on the side of the road, and he stepped to the other side of the street and he kept on going. You say, Reverend, come on, let's put ourselves in his shoes. Because if you saw him on the side of the road, maybe you said what he said, maybe they still out here. And if I don't keep moving, they're going to get me too. So maybe he kept on going, because if I get involved, I might end up just like him. That's a possibility, right? Maybe because he was a priest, and priests were not allowed to touch dead things, dead corpses, dead bodies. Maybe he said to himself, well, he looks like he's dead, and if I touch him, I will be defiled, and I can't do my priestly job. So maybe I better not. So he hops on the other side of the road. I don't know. But maybe he knew the Levite was coming behind him, and he said, well, I'm not going to touch him because I might defile myself. I tell you what, I'll leave him for the Levite to come by and check on him. And then that way I know everything will be all right. You see, it's kind of criminal. Listen, when you and I take what God has given us, responsibility God's given us, and we don't do what God is asking us to do with that responsibility. Amen. Listen, I know it might not be popular, but it's a responsibility God has given us. To make sure we're checking in on our children for homework, to make sure that we are making sure our children have what they need mentally to do what's right in school. God has called us to high levels of responsibility. And so one thing we have to do is confront the criminals that are on the road. The priest had a duty to God, but he was derelict to the man laying in the street. Somebody say amen.
Amen.
All right, you're looking at me rough. I'm speaking Spanish. Y'all looking at me. Okay, stay with me now. Stay with me. Here's something else that I see. So here comes the Levite. The Levite comes, and here's what the text reads. When you really read the text, the priest was walking, and he happened to see him, and he went around to the other side of the road. The Levite, the text reads that he walks up to the brother, looks at him. Isn't that a shame? Then turns around and goes to the other side of the street and walks back home. Yeah, come on. He sees a man who's been beat. He might be half naked. He's in a bad situation, condition. And the Levite goes over to him, looks at him, sees what has happened to him, and then does this number and keeps on moving. Church, listen, that happens more than we want to admit. Amen. That happens when... This is not even scripted. You're not going to like this, but it's true. That happens when some young girl tells a parent that someone touched her inappropriately, and because there's relationship there, no one investigates that claim, and something that should be checked on becomes neglected, and an abuse happens for years simply because someone would not take the responsibility to investigate what's going on and to be willing to do something about it. You ain't got to say, man, I'm telling the truth. Oh, yeah, that happens, and it happens. And what's sad, it happens even amongst the church members, because we believe in grace and we believe in forgiveness. But here, listen, you will be forgiven, my God. But listen, you might need to spend some time. Amen. Doing some time, because what you've done is you've imposed your right on someone else's, on a minor. You have taken away from them in order to gratify something in you, and that is not right. Amen. We pray for you, we forgive you, but we got to deal with you. Amen. Yeah, it has to be dealt with. And so God calls us to, sometimes you got to confront the criminals. You got to confront what isn't right. We have to call it out. We have to see it, and we have to say, listen, brother, listen, sister, this is what it is. And one part of our Christian responsibility is that we got to confront criminal activity. Amen. We got to confront criminal activity. So the Levite, he crosses the other side of the street. He sees him and takes time to look at him and keeps on crossing. Listen, what he's teaching us is, listen, things are criminal in our society, and we've got to deal with what we can. Amen. We can't stop all things, but whatever the Lord has put in your peripheral or your understanding, we have a responsibility to do as much as we can about it. Why? Because things are criminal. It's criminal when politicians misuse funds for personal gain. Yes. Yeah, it's criminal when people in power misuse their power for personal gain. Yes. It's criminal when policies are created to hurt people of color. Yes. It's criminal when people of color abuse, kill, and rob their own people of color. It's absolutely criminal. Yes. Listen, that while we are talking about the race issue, African Americans got to talk about our own issue. Yes. That we're killing each other at a high rate. Amen. That we're hurting each other at a very high rate. You cannot ignore those things whenever you go to the poll to vote. You cannot ignore those things when you're with your cousins and them and they talking that kind of talk. You can't ignore that. It's happening with our own people. Here's what Barack said in an interview he did a few years back. He said last year, he said this, President Obama highlighted the importance of this issue. He said, the single greatest cause of death for young black men between the ages of 18 and 35 is homicide. And that's crazy. Obama said that. That is crazy. Actually, it's worse than that. According to the CDC, homicide is the #1 cause for African Americans of all age groups from 15 to 34. Homicide. Us black people, black men dying at this rate. Listen, there's some criminal activity going on, church. And church, whether or not they're your cousins, your family, your friends, you and I have a responsibility to tell them, baby, listen, don't take these lives. Don't do these things, because God, He's the giver of life, and you and I should be givers of life also. Can you say amen? Amen. It is criminal, church. It's criminal when pushers sell drugs and opioids to their children's best friend's parents. It's kind of criminal. You just call it what it is. I call it what it is, church. Call it what it is. It's even criminal when parents expose their child's innocent eyes to drug use, pornography, domestic violence. They're popping and locking, twisting and twerking, but they can't hardly say the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, let alone write a complete sentence. That is criminal. Amen. It is criminal. It's criminal. We got to address that. I know it's tight, but you got to address it. You can't let that loose because the time. Did you know I saw this thing? I saw this this interview that said that they had built a couple of robots, and they were trialing them out over in Japan, I think it was, that could flip hamburgers. Oh, thank you, Lord. Let me push back on you. Let me push back. For all my young people, you say to me, Reverend, I don't need an education. I don't have to go. I don't feel like I need to do it. I'm going to tell you something. I remember 15 years ago when they were saying, y'all better get your act together because when you go to the grocery store, they're going to have they're going to be able to check people. They're not even going to need attendants at the grocery store because you're going to be able to check your own stuff out. Man, I was like, man, that's crazy. Do you not know you can go to the grocery store right now and check your own stuff out? What are you saying, Reverend? Here's what I'm saying. Some of the things they're trying to make us, you got to step your game up. Let me say it just like that. If you say, I'm only going to get a certain level of education and I'm done, I ain't going to do anything to improve myself, what you're doing, you're closing the door of opportunity in your life. You're closing because the bar is raising every single decade. What we are joking about now, imagine 10 years from now what will be able to happen. You can buy your groceries from the house. You can. That's what I'm saying. You can buy your groceries and they deliver from the house. So whenever you want to sell, watch this. Whenever you just want to settle for good, watch this. If you don't push for great, you're going to be obsolete. And the money you want to make, you can't make because you won't press yourself to do better. And everyone who is at a certain age, certain level of life, and you're not trying to be successful in a certain thing, you're just chilling, you coasting, you can look back and tell some young person, if you don't push, if you don't sacrifice now, when you get my age, you're going to play the shoulda, coulda, woulda's radio station. Wishing I had done right, wishing I had pushed further, wishing I had went back to school, wishing I had finished that degree. Even if you say a 4-year college is not for you, you need a trade, you need something that is a skill, you need something that will take your life to the next level. That's right. And if you don't have a criminal record, you ought to praise God for it. Because once you get a felony, doors like you would not believe close on you. And the more you uneducate yourself and you be in criminal activity, the less likely you will be successful. You got to fight and scratch every year of your life just to make a decent living. Amen. Decent. I ain't talking about getting paid. I'm talking about just to put food on the table. Yeah. And all I'm saying is, some of these things, we got to see it. Man, that's criminal. They robbing us. Every time you spend an hour looking on Facebook and you hadn't even read a book to educate yourself, it's criminal. You're robbing. They're robbing you. They're robbing you. Every time you spend more time watching music videos and you're not learning anything, it is robbing you of opportunity, robbing you of taking it to the next level. All you're settling for is good. And good, watch this, not good enough. It's not good enough. I know a lot of people testify on me right now, Reverend, if I had to do it all over again, woo! Take me back. I'd have studied. I'd have said no to that party. I would have never went out with them. If I'd have had to do it all over again. And so all of you that are ready, are you in cruise? You just want to, you're making it, especially my young people. I was like that too when I was growing up. And I got a job. And I started making that money. Woo, Lord have mercy. I'm just going to quit school. Here's the problem with that. You're going to limit. You're going to put this, there will be a cap on you. If you don't push yourself to go to the next level. There's no excuse. Again, even if you don't go to a 4-year university, there's enough education out here that can get you equipped that you can do so many different things. No one will ever be able to put you in a box because you say to yourself, I may not can do it like them, but I'm going to do what I got to do to make sure I'm successful. And here's what you don't know. That you don't know what you don't know. That's what you don't know. You don't know that you don't know. And I'm trying to tell you, you've got to learn something so you don't let people fool you into thinking Because you dress nice, you're successful. No, sister, no, brother. You got to get something up in here. You got to prepare yourself, because in 10 years, the game is going to change, and I want to be relevant in 10 years. Amen. I want to stay relevant when I'm older, because I need to live a life that God can use, because good isn't good enough. Amen. And that's a part of confronting criminal activity as we see it in our own lives. When you see these things happening, listen, don't let TV rob you. Don't let social media rob you. Don't let your girlfriends rob you. Don't let these things rob you from putting your time in. Coach used to say to us, he said, if you pay now, you can play later. Mm-hmm. But if you play now, you will pay later. Okay, you're going to pay later. So I encourage all my young people who are graduating or you're working, whatever you do, don't stop because you're making a little money. I want to tell you, push yourself. Push yourself. Go the extra mile. Push yourself. Don't settle for good. Get the best grades possible. Get a free education if you can with grants and scholarships. Don't settle. Moms and dads, you say, man, I can't even do this 4th grade math. Fine. Find somebody who can that can help your child get to the next level. Don't let your child settle. Don't let your child be cool in the game. Let them get out there and pressure and work themselves, because at the end of the day, when they're older, they're going to look back and say, they can enjoy life because they have put themselves in a better situation. That deserves a shout and amen. Listen, we got to be willing to correct conditions. Number 2, we got to be willing to confront criminals, the criminal activity we see. Here's the final movement, and I'll close, is that we must be willing to do this. We must be willing to create connections. I've been talking about that a lot. We must be willing to create connections. It was awesome. The Samaritan comes along now. Watch this. He's identified by his nationality, a Samaritan. That's like saying a black man came by. That's like saying a Hispanic man came by. A Samaritan who was it seems in the text that he was not the man who was in the ditch was not the same as he. He was a different nationality. This Samaritan comes by and sees this situation, and he gets himself involved, and he does several things. Number 1, he came to the stranger. I like that. That's in verse 33. Number 2, he had compassion on the stranger. That's verse 33 again. Number 3, he covered the wounds of the stranger. Verse 34. Now, verse 34 again, he carried the stranger to safety. Verse 35, he also carried he cared for the stranger financially. This man got involved in this guy's life, and he takes them to this hotel. And here's the question that I'm looking at as I'm reading this text, and I see he goes in the hotel and he tells this man, here's 2 denarii, and I want you to take care of this brother. And when I come back, whatever you had to spend, I'll pay you for the rest of it. But hey, what kind of relationship did he have with the innkeeper that they said, we got you, man? I know that's right. Come here, think with me. Come on and think. What kind of relationship did he have at the innkeeper where the innkeeper, he said, I'm good for it. You can trust me with it. I'll pay my bills. I'll pay you back. You can trust me. Right. Here's what he does. He has connections. I don't know if this was the first time this ever happened. I don't know if he had found other people before and brought them to this place and they've got this resource going. Here's what I know, that because he's involved, he has created, these connections have created resources for him. And church, and that's what I want us to understand, that whenever you and I need to understand that good is not good enough, one of the things we do as we create connections is that we begin to create resources for our brothers and sisters in Christ Jesus. Whenever you and I link up together to do a good thing, resources come available. Amen. If you will use your mind, this is for my young people for sure. If you will use your mind and do what's right in what you're doing in your schooling and your preparatory work, somebody is going to say you are worth the investment, and they're going to give resources to you to help you get to the next level. Amen. Yeah. I hear Frankie talk about it several times whenever we're having meetings, and this one he knows, and I like how Frankie works because Frankie has connections with people, and they give him favor. And I'm just like, Lord, let me, I don't know what Frankie got, but just touch my shoulder, Lord, with what you give him. Because what happens is when you have favor with people, you make connections with people, People, you don't have to ask for a handout. They see you as a person that they can put their resources into, and they say, there's going to be a return on what I give you. All I'm saying is whatever God has given us, these relationships with different people, God has given us these opportunities, and he says, I want you to maximize them for my glory. And when resources begin to meet resources, God's people do great things. God's people do great things. We got to make connections. That's what happened in this text. This brother has a connection with the innkeeper, and the innkeeper says, man, you know what? I'm going to take care of this. And when we come back, we're squared up. Why? Because there's connection there and there's resources there. God has people ready to bless Shepherd's Way. God has people ready to bless you individually simply because you and I are opening up ourselves because to this notion that good isn't good enough. I want to do great. Amen. I want to do something good and great. I want to do it better than I did it before, better than last year. I want to educate myself, lift myself, push myself, strive for excellence. That's what he helps us to understand. If we can strive for excellence, God will bless what our hands touch. Amen. Can I close like this? That even my Jesus wasn't just good enough. Jesus wasn't just good enough. No, his life was better than good. He had a great life. Watch what he did. Jesus, I gotta close with Jesus because that's the best way to close. That when Jesus came on the scene, his life was better than good because Jesus corrected conditions. Because anytime people came to him, he healed the sick, he raised the dead, he cleansed the lepers, he opened up blind eyes. Every time you came in contact with Jesus, you never left the same way that you came. Why? Because good wasn't good enough for Jesus. No, good wasn't good enough for Jesus. Not only was his life better than good, but his death was better than good. How do you know, Reverend? Because he confronted the criminals, but watch this, he also converted the criminals. For the Bible says that while he was hanging on the cross between two thieves, Jesus said to the man, today thy sin you'll be with me in paradise. Why is that? Because when Jesus gets involved, he changes even the criminal's heart. He changes even the criminal's mind. I'm just talking about his death wasn't good, it was great. And here's the last thing to consider. His resurrection wasn't good, it was better than good. How do you know? Because Jesus is alive. Watch this. That's good, but what makes it great is that he's alive forevermore.
Thank you for joining us on The Shepherd's Voice. Please visit us on the web at swaycc.org. That's swaycc.org. Or visit us on our YouTube page, Shepherd's Way Christian Church. Please join us for our new service times, 8:30 a.m. and 11 a.m., beginning June 3rd. We're located at 140 East Bant Street, Zebulon, North Carolina. Again, thank you for listening.